Look around you, the screen in front of you, the chair beneath you, the floor under your feet. Everything feels perfectly still, solid, stable, at rest. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Nothing you are looking at has ever been truly still. Not for a single moment. Even the most motionless object in the room is filled with constant activity, tiny movements layered on top of one another, hidden far beyond your senses. The stillness you trust is not something the universe recognizes. It is something your perception creates when motion becomes too small, too fast, or too subtle to notice. And once you see this, the idea of a resting world begins to quietly fall apart. So, if nothing is ever really still, what does it actually mean? For something to exist? We rely on stillness more than we realize. Our entire sense of stability depends on it. We build houses because the ground feels unmoving. We place objects on tables because they stay where we leave them. We trust the world because it doesn't constantly shift beneath us. Stillness feels like safety. When something is still, it feels predictable, reliable, under control. Movement, on the other hand, feels dangerous. A moving car can hurt you. A shifting floor means collapse. An unstable structure means failure. So we learn very early on to divide the world into two categories: things that move and things that don't. A swinging door moves. A rolling ball moves. But the wall behind them does not. At least, that's how it seems. We even define rest in opposition to motion. Something is at rest when its position doesn't change relative to us. And that definition feels sufficient. After all, if an object stays in the same place, what reason do we have to question it? Stillness becomes invisible. We stop noticing it. The same way we stop noticing gravity or air. It fades into the background and becomes part of what we call normal. Even science, at first glance, seems to agree. In everyday physics, we talk about stationary objects, rest frames, equilibrium. We treat motion as something that happens and rest as the default state. But this intuition is built entirely around what we can see and measure easily. It is shaped by scales, where change happens slowly enough for our senses to track. The problem is that the universe does not care about our senses. And the deeper we look, the more fragile the idea of stillness becomes. Because what feels motionless to us may only be motion that has slipped out of view. Now let's look closer, much closer. Take an object that seems perfectly still. A rock, a table, a wall. At your scale, nothing appears to move. But that calm surface hides a very different reality. Zoom in past what your eyes can see, past texture, past grains, past molecules. You arrive at atoms. And this is where the idea of stillness begins to collapse. Atoms are not tiny, rigid blocks. They are dynamic systems. Electrons do not sit quietly in place. They exist as clouds of probability, constantly in motion. They shift, they vibrate, they fluctuate. Even when an object appears motionless, its atoms are vibrating relentlessly. Not because something disturbed them, but because motion is their natural state. This vibration is not optional. If atomic motion were to stop completely, the object itself would cease to exist in any recognizable form. Structure depends on motion. Stability is maintained by activity. What you call rest is not the absence of movement. It is the balance of countless movements, canceling out at large scales. At one level, everything is in motion. At another, that motion averages out and creates the illusion of stillness. This is why a table can feel solid, even though nothing inside it is still. This is why a mountain can appear unmoving, even as its atoms dance continuously. Stillness is not something objects have. It is something that emerges when motion becomes too small, too fast, and too evenly distributed to detect. The universe does not pause. It only hides its motion behind scale. And once you recognize this, the idea that stillness is a fundamental state becomes impossible to defend, because what looks like rest is really motion you are no longer equipped to see. Let's try an experiment. Not with machines or equations, but with imagination. Pick something near you that feels completely still. A table, a wall, the ground beneath your feet. Now imagine you could zoom in, not all at once, slowly. At first, nothing changes. The surface still looks calm, solid, unmoving. Zoom in a little more. You begin to see texture, tiny imperfections, irregularities in the surface. Still, nothing seems to move. Zoom further, past the visible structure, past grains and fibers, down to molecules. Now the stillness begins to blur. Molecules are vibrating, not dramatically, not violently, but constantly. They shift back and forth around average positions, never settling, never freezing in place. Zoom in again. Now you see atoms. And here, the idea of rest disappears entirely. Electrons do not orbit neatly like planets. They form restless clouds, spread out in space, constantly fluctuating. Their motion is not driven by heat alone. It does not vanish when things cool down. It is part of how matter exists. At this scale, motion is not something that happens. It is something that is. Now imagine zooming out again, from atoms back to molecules, from molecules to solids, from solids to the objects around you. As you pull back, all that motion begins to average out. The vibrations cancel each other. The fluctuations blur together. And from a distance, what you see looks perfectly still. Not because motion stopped, but because your perspective changed. Stillness is not the absence of motion. It is motion that has become invisible. This is why stillness feels so convincing. Your senses are tuned to survival, not to microscopic truth. They evolved to track large, slow changes, falling objects, approaching threats, shifting ground. They were never meant to show you the constant activity beneath the surface of things. So the universe does not lie to you. It simply moves in ways you are not built to notice. And once you understand this, the question changes. It is no longer, why do things move? It becomes, how much motion must exist for the world to look still? At this point, a reasonable objection appears. You might think, fine, things move because they have energy, because they're warm, because heat keeps everything in motion. So let's remove the heat. Imagine cooling an object down, slower, colder, closer and closer to absolute zero. This is the lowest temperature physically possible, a point where thermal motion is minimized as much as the universe allows. Intuitively, this feels like the end of movement. No heat, no energy, no motion, perfect stillness. But physics refuses to cooperate with that intuition. Even at absolute zero, motion does not disappear. Particles still fluctuate. Atoms still possess energy. Not because something is disturbing them, but because complete rest is forbidden. This is not a technical detail. It is a fundamental feature of reality. If particles could be perfectly still, they would have precisely defined positions and zero momentum. But the universe does not allow that. There is always uncertainty, always fluctuation, always motion. This residual activity is called zero-point motion, but the name is misleading. It is not almost nothing. It is unavoidable motion built into existence itself. Matter cannot freeze into absolute rest, because rest is not a permitted state. Stillness is not something the universe can reach, no matter how hard it tries. Even in the coldest regions of space, even in conditions far beyond anything we can create. Motion persists, quiet, subtle, relentless. This means something profound. The last refuge of stillness, the idea that motion disappears when energy is removed, does not exist. Motion is not caused by heat. Heat is only one expression of motion. We happen to notice the universe does not move because it is warm. It moves because motion is its default condition. And if that is true, then stillness is not a physical state. It is a human approximation, a label we apply when motion falls below our ability to detect it. At this point, something becomes clear. Stillness is not a property of the universe. It is a limitation of perception. We call something still, not because it has stopped moving, but because its motion no longer matters to us. Or more precisely, because we can no longer feel it. Your senses are threshold. They only register change above a certain scale. Below that scale, motion fades into silence. This is why a table feels solid and unmoving, even as its atoms vibrate endlessly. This is why the ground feels stable, even as the planet spins, orbits a star, and drifts through space. Still does not mean motionless. It means motion that does not affect your survival. So the idea of rest is not written into reality. It is written into biology. Your brain evolved to ignore constant motion, so it could focus on what changes, on threats, on opportunities, on movement that matters. In a universe where everything is always in motion, stillness becomes a useful illusion, a way to simplify a world that would otherwise be overwhelming. But illusions, no matter how useful, should not be mistaken for truth. The universe does not pause. It does not settle. It does not wait. It only flows, fluctuates, and transforms. What you experience as stability is not the absence of change, but a temporary balance within it. And once you see this, the meaning of existence shifts. To exist is not to stand still. It is to persist as a pattern within continuous motion, so nothing is ever really still. Not the objects around you, not the ground beneath you, not even you. What feels stable is only motion that has become quiet enough to fade into the background. The universe does not offer rest as a state of being. It offers balance, temporary patterns that hold together while everything inside them continues to move. And those patterns are what we call things. Existence, then, is not about standing still. It is about enduring change, about remaining recognizable while never actually stopping. This doesn't make the world chaotic or meaningless. It makes it alive. Everything that exists is participating in a constant silent motion that never fully disappears. And perhaps that is why stillness feels so comforting. It gives us the illusion that something can remain unchanged. So here is the question to leave you with. If nothing in the universe is ever truly still, and motion is the most fundamental state of all, then what does it really mean? When we say that something exists,